All right. So we got a lot to cover. And if any of you have heard me talk before, I tend to talk slow, so I'm going to speed it up this time. But there's a lot I think that I continue to just dive into from the gut side that I think is incredibly important. And the first step in understanding, why does your gut break down? Your gut breaks down as a sign of metabolic inflammation. And I want to quickly rip through metabolic inflammation. Now, your body at the top left, you're supposed to respond to damaged cell debris or irritant chemicals, pathogens, nutrient deficiencies, all sorts of issues that trigger, it could be overtraining, trigger a meta-inflammatory response. And then inflammation gets kicked off. And when the inflammation gets kicked off, it's supposed to countermeasure the source of the inflammation, what caused it. And then you're supposed to go back to homeostasis. The problem is when you're under chronic inflammatory signaling, a bunch of things start to happen. At the base of that, I believe that with chronic inflammation, you end up with chronic gut permeability problems, which is going to be our focus. But it spreads across all aspects of your chemistry. So you start to see changes in your lipids. You begin to get muscle loss and you're more catabolic. That's the whole sarcopenia that occurs, because with inflammation signaling that can be initiated by reactivity to foods, you start to create this sarcopenic behavior. You can begin to see changes in iron and ferritin. So I bet you're seeing a lot of people now with higher iron, lower ferritin, and that becomes an issue as well. And then, of course, as they transition to insulin resistance, because of the upregulation of inflammatory compounds like TNF-alpha that come from the gut, interleukin-6, the toll receptor 4, JAK kinases, you lose your insulin receptor sensitivity, and that starts to change your insulin signaling, which drives more inflammation related to weight gain, diabetes, heart disease, dementia. And I would say that that is directly tied to the issues with gut permeability, the production of lipopolysaccharide, and the issues around food allergies that drive that behavior in your chemistry in your gut. And then, of course, the next piece is osteoporosis. So when we malabsorb, when we break our gut lining down, we don't absorb things. And when we're under chronic inflammation, we upregulate IL-1 beta, we upregulate IL-6, we downregulate our osteocalcin. Now we're not building bone anymore. The worst piece of this is that as we progress, we lead to things like issues with neurogenesis and cell plasticity. So you start to feel like you're pushing a thought through jello, right? Foggy headache, cognitive issues. For those of you that have had plenty of folks with just something as simple as candida, they eat, they get foggy headed after they eat, right? And so you realize when you take people off offending foods, they feel sharper, they feel better, they're less inflamed, their joints don't hurt, they start to lose weight. And then the end of the funnel, at the very end of the funnel, is mitochondrial dysfunction. So as you continue to push out inflammatory cytokines, you downregulate the respiration and ATP synthesis, you decrease your NAD to NADH ratio, and the net of that is you lose power. And so as we move through this process today of talking about food, the one thing everybody does is they have to eat. They don't have to take CoQ10. They don't have to do rapamycin. They don't have to take ginkgo. They don't have to take it. They don't have to take a single dang supplement. But the one thing they have to do every day is eat. And so at the core of trying to correct inflammatory signaling in an individual, you've got to find out what foods they're sensitive to or they're allergic to. When you look at food allergies and sensitivities, it's a significant issue. So 15 million suffer from a true IgE food sensitivity, and another 15 to 20% on IgG. I personally think, these are 2015 data points, I think it's way more than that. I think there's very few people that come into our practices, that come into Lifetime now, where we're putting in longevity centers into these big fitness box facilities, where people don't have some food intolerance. They've been on a rich history of antibiotics, they've been on oral contraceptives, maybe they're on a statin, maybe they're on a proton pump inhibitor, there's a lot of different drugs that can alter your microbiome. And at the same time, people that are training really hard, the harder you train, the more you disrupt your gut. The harder you train, the more you have to work at recovery. That's why you hear terms like runner's diarrhea. So I think this is actually a very conservative estimate. Allergies are simple. They're immediate reactions. They're life-threatening. You get nauseous, you get hives, you get swelling, you get wheezing, you get shortness of breath, your airway closes. You want to know about those, right? Those are pretty obvious. Probably the more extensive issue for most people, especially when you're dealing with autoimmunity or irritable bowel or those types of things, or just trying to improve performance, is that you have a food sensitivity that can take up to 72 hours for you to feel that sensitivity reaction. And the common causes listed here: wheat, dairy, corn, eggs, nuts, soy. But honestly, it can be any food. If any of you have been doing these tests, I've been doing food allergy testing and sensitivity testing for 25, 30 years. It could be broccoli. It could be almonds. You think you're doing good, switching over to almond milk because you're getting mucusy from dairy, and then the almond you're reacting to too, right? That's why you want to understand what you're sensitive to. Where does it begin? It begins when an allergen gets through the epithelial cells and presents itself to an antigen-presenting cell. That creates an IgE response. The next time that allergen crosses across that barrier, you have the epitope for that IgE response, and then you get mast cell activation, increase in basophils. Whenever you see a basophil over 1, you should probably be looking at, or are they reacting to food, but their gut is probably permeable and they're reacting to something. And then, of course, the downstream effect of histamine, leukotrienes, and cytokines being released create the symptoms related not just to allergies, but cognitive capacity, anxiety, nervousness, plaque in your arteries for that matter, right? Inflammation, metabolic inflammation is global. It isn't like it differentiates. It's just that it's going to pick out your weakest organ. One of the reasons you want to try to get this from the ground up is that every organ in your system is interrelated. And if you're thinking about longevity, you're only as strong as your weakest organ. So that's why we want to try to take the sources of inflammation out of the body. And yes, people have SIRS, and they have metals, and they have pesticides, they got glyphosate, they got stress, they got poor sleep, bad diets. They're on a bunch of medications that have caused it. So there's a lot of different reasons why this is at that ground level state. And basically, when you have a healthy mucosal barrier and solid tight junctions, food particles that may be partially digested, peptides or phenolics, they don't get through. And you end up with good blood flow, not a lot of contaminants going into the bloodstream. As we break the tight junctions, now we allow for antigen-presenting cell activity because you get things like bacterial translocation. The tight junctions break either because of bad bugs under dysbiosis or a pathogen. You start to make more zonulin. When you increase zonulin, the tight junctions break. The other way that happens is if you're under a lot of stress and you make a lot of interleukin-6. Interleukin-6 upregulates claudin-2. Claudin-2 within the epithelial cell. Claudin-2 sends a signal to break the tight junctions. A couple different ways that can happen, right? And just remember, first 1,000 days of life dictate a child's microbiome. We're seeing increasing amounts of allergies, eczema, asthma, autoimmunity, eosinophilic esophagitis, early childhood. There's whole hospital wings now and departments devoted to EOE. The University of Cincinnati has one of the national centers for it. And so there's this early antibiotic intake, lots of synthetic chemicals in the foods that kids are eating. Their diet can be skewed, right? Here you want a Pop-Tart, honey, that kind of stuff. And that is associated with the development of a food allergy. And I would also say not just IgE, but because we're creating that antigen-presenting cell activation, it bleeds into IgG4, IgG, and then C3 as well. So all of this is happening. And what are the drugs that affect? Just so you guys know, take a look. It's just not antibiotics. NSAIDs, corticosteroids, oral contraceptives, PPIs, metformin, statins, antipsychotics, opioids, and maybe others. It's estimated about 24% of the drugs on the market are altering the microbiome. And that means that probiotics and fiber and prebiotics and those types of things are incredibly important for individuals just at a baseline. And realizing there's allergy and sensitivity. I kind of already went through IgG or IgE, right? It's the immediate reaction. It's the histaminic reaction. IgG, less severe, but can play itself out over 72 hours. And then 4 is actually made to block the IgE response, which is really positive. Unless you really load up a lot of IgG4, then that leads to autoimmunity. So IgG4 has been associated with autoimmune patterns. And then the complement, so if you're looking at C3 or C3BD, obviously that relates to basically accelerating or amplifying the IgG response. So if your IgG response is, say, somewhat significant, but you have a complement immune response with it, you have a 10,000-fold immune reaction based on that. And this is why IgG4, I think I've already said it, it's super important in terms of not developing autoimmunity, and it also helps with IgE. And it's that thought of a moderate amount of IgG4 or mild, it's protective. As it starts to build, it becomes destructive. Just something to keep in mind why we want to monitor those. And a lot of times people go, oh, IgG doesn't matter. It's what you ate. The reality is it all matters. If you're triggering an immune response, you're triggering an immune response, right? So you want to calm down that epithelial barrier, and you want to be able to build back integrity in those tight junctions. And with C3BD, once again, it really pushes people towards the Th2 side of immune activation, allergic response, but then that inflammatory signaling that goes on systemically that feeds the breakdown of the gut. If you think of it, if you get under stress, your brain gets neurally inflamed or just high cortisol, but you trigger the sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system triggers the enterochromaffin cells of your enteric nervous system. And then the enteric nervous system releases corticotropin releasing hormone peripherally. That has a direct effect on your integrity of your bowel. The cortisol that's being released due to the chronic stress has effect on the integrity of the bowel, so you get more permeability. And then the CRH also contributes to creating more mast cell activation. So you kind of get the trifecta when your brain's under a lot of stress, and you start to create these types of drives. And this was just the development of the C3BD signaling and stimulant of the complement pathway. If you look here, microbes, or you could think of either pathogen-associated molecular patterns, damage-associated molecular patterns, you get this danger sensing effect, which drives towards, if you look here, C3b, C3d, and these are all basically, as you do this, you're creating that danger transmission into the complement immune system, which rapidly starts to ratchet up your immunologic response. This is the test. I like using this one for documentation when I'm doing education, because the green kind of stands out. When people get their test, it's white, yellow, or red. But basically what you get to do is see where is the individual reacting and how significant. If you look to the right, gluten is IgG4, a very high IgG, and C3BD. They keep eating gluten. They can push themselves towards autoimmunity. And if you see IgE and IgG4 together, that's a very significant reaction. Now, if someone's barely above the IgG line for, say, IgG only, right here, for example, or this one's just within range. Let's see, here's a barely over the edge. So if you're, say, at 3.0 versus 2.5, I'm not as concerned about that. If you're working on someone's gut, they could probably eat something once a week if it's not a food that I'd say is on the no-no list for autoimmunity. And it goes through a lot of different foods. So you're going through the most common foods. Note here that you also have mixes. And in some cases, like the aspergillus mix, I always like doing, say, a VCS test after, see if it's mold related. If bean comes up and peanuts come up, is significant, then you have to worry about all legumes in that case. It's very thorough. And then it gives you a list of, and what I do is try to get people to understand, look, if it's a mild restriction, it's for performance enhancement. Hey, I want to take this test. I really don't have any issues. This is the most highly reactive foods on the left. And then when you have moderate to high reactions, or you're dealing with autoimmunity, you try to give them the bigger list and say, follow it as best you can. Obviously, when people have a list that's incredibly long, I take out the big offenders, work on their gut for 60 days. Am I getting a positive response with them? And we work on their gut using something like BPC or probiotics, obviously, cat's claw, berberine, grapefruit seed extract, any number of those agents, right? So where's the causality? A lot of this comes from the gut immune brain interface. People are under chronic stress. When their gut starts to get damaged, you can't filter and protect. And then you get, of course, an immune function reaction where you start to upregulate your antigen presenting cells and you start to get intraepithelial lymphocyte accumulation in the tissue, which then creates an activation within the tissue itself, as well as an activation through your bloodstream, the antigen presenting cells. And the main purpose of the gut immune brain axis is it's all about being primary command for your body, but it's all about filtering, defense, and repair, getting nutrients in, restoring the nutrient integrity in the body for the following day's work. It's a major physiologic interface, the protection from the outside world. And what damages the epithelial cells typically damages the inner lining of your arteries and typically damages that one cell layer, thick blood-brain barrier. And when it's organized, it's normal and secure. And when it's disordered, it's not good, right? Anxiety, sleep problems, right? You hear people that they get rid of their food allergens or sensitivities and their sleep is better. People with irritable bowel, they walk into a store, where are they looking for the first plate? Where's that bathroom at? So that becomes unpredictable and problematic. And nobody likes to walk around feeling bloated, distended, gassy, foggy headed. And that's the major interface. And a lot of your immune system's in your gut. And so when you have dysbiosis in the gut, a lot of different conditions, we're going to relate to several of these. And then what are the biggest things that happen? Medications do it, stress does it, diet does it. Look, people eat too much, they eat too often, they eat too late, they pick the wrong foods, they're under stress, they're drinking probably more than they should at night. Little glass of wine becomes a goblet or more. And then they could be training really hard. That's a really big piece of the puzzle, is moderate training to more intense training. And then, of course, there's the big elephant in the room, environmental burden, things like glyphosate and toxic metals like mercury. I know all of them lead to that gut dysregulation. And this is just that reiteration of the fact that as I disrupt the gut and I alter my gut microbiome and have reduced short chain fatty acid production, less repair of the gut, more intestinal dysbiosis, and with stress comes a significant influence on the gut, from gut motility to paracellular permeability between the cells and actually within the cell. And then, of course, mucosal blood flow. When blood flow goes down, lipopolysaccharide goes up. Bugs start to die. When bugs die, you release lipopolysaccharide. And lipopolysaccharide is supposed to be taken out of your lymph and your liver. And when it can't do that, it then starts to circulate and attach to organs and tissues, or crosses the blood-brain barrier and then triggers microglial activation. And it's just important to keep in mind that if you're triggering these lymphocytes on a regular basis, I'm eating food, I'm triggering a reaction, you're going to be damaging the tight junctions, just specifically because of that immune reaction going on in the gut. And once again, more and more people with autoimmunity, a lot of this is triggering autoimmunity. And so this is ground level work. A lot of us want to dive into the advanced stuff. Hey, I'm going to give you KPV and lorazepam or BPC, or I'm going to do a detox on your gut. All that is great. You want to heal that lining in the gut. But why give them a bunch of things when they're eating foods that are just making you swim upstream to get the repair going? So that's why it's so important to think about it. I put this slide up. You see this down here, monocytes? One of the biggest things that I look at is percent monocytes, percent eosinophils, and then percent basophils. And I do that because it's a good indication of where's the gut at, right? Because the monocyte will differentiate in either M2 macrophages or M1 macrophages. Obviously, we don't want to create the inflammatory macrophages. And we want to make sure that we're not wearing down our neutrophils. The thing I look at is, hey, are their neutrophils kind of trending low now in the 40s while their MEBs are high? That means that there's this chronic issue going on, eroding the immune response in the individual. And this is obviously an HLA class of reaction. Why that's important is, of course, if you're familiar with SIRS, people are exposed to mold. They're prone to trigger all these HLA gene steps, which of course create a whole nother pattern of inflammation that occurs. That's also going to lead to problems in the gut. And once again, bottom line here, on the HLA side, susceptibility to over 50 autoimmune conditions. But where the rubber starts hitting the road is with this development of lipopolysaccharide. Obviously, lipopolysaccharide, one cell, single bacterial cell will release 1 million LPS molecules. So as you get reduced blood flow to the gut, you're going to get more lipopolysaccharide. Ketogenic diets will do it. Drugs like ibuprofen does it. I mentioned overtraining, stress, binge drinking, poor food choices. Just as you break down the gut lining, you're going to be more prone to make more lipopolysaccharide, and I'll show you the importance of that in just a little bit. The second component to this is histamine. So if you look over here on the right, histamine's more that I'm itchy, or that I have a rash, or I have a skin wheal. It can be behind headaches and migraines and dizziness and sleep problems, changes in your circadian pattern, which a lot of people are obviously struggling with that these days. The obvious ones on the upper right, itchy skin, swelling, edema, hives. But then look at all the gut symptoms: acid reflux, bloating, stomach pain, and discomfort. So as we start to ramp up those antigen-presenting cells and the IgE epitopes are being created, we move ourselves through all these types of symptoms. Now, is it always caused by this? No. My only point is that food is important. Zonulin, the other thing to keep in mind is as zonulin goes up, you break those tight junctions. And elevated zonulin levels have been correlated to a lot of different conditions and diseases. Attention deficit, gliomas, MS. Once again, and all of you have been doing this work for a while now, you get people with autoimmunity onto a good food elimination diet and test them for food allergies, they start feeling better. This was a cool study. They looked at intestinal permeability, which led to endotoxin. Gut microbiota lipopolysaccharide accelerates the inflammation process. And then inflammation is associated with insulin resistance, plaque into your arteries, and risk of coronary artery disease. LPS induced coronary artery disease. LPS is occurring because of the breakdown in the gut and bad bacteria, poor diversity of flora. So they looked at disease-free centenarians. They had significantly lower levels of zonulin and lipopolysaccharide compared to younger patients with acute myocardial infarction. They also had significantly lower concentrations of lipopolysaccharide than the younger healthy controls. So if you don't think that getting the gut right is at the center of living healthy and long, I think it's naive. And once again, it's hard to correct the gut if you're chronically eating things that are triggering inflammatory response in your gut. Now, I'm going to give you some new information. As lipopolysaccharide goes up in your brain because it's crossing the blood-brain barrier, it starts to trigger galectin-3. And galectin-3, prostate cancer, galectin-3, but galectin-3, its job is to help patrol that neuroinflammation that got triggered. So your microglial cells end up being activated and pushing out galectin-3 as a response to a lipopolysaccharide. It acts on immune receptors like toll receptor 4 and TREM2. But where does galectin-3 play a role? Inflammation and neuroinflammation, fibrosis, including the heart and kidneys. It triggers microglial activation. It furthers microglial activation. And then it also increases expression of macrophages. The levels can go up in cancer, organ fibrosis, cardiac failure, TBIs, et cetera. And with GAL3 going up, here's the major organs, not including the brain, where we start to see these issues. And you may remember I said to look at monocytes. On monocytes, you're getting up over 8. You're starting to see a little bit of that metaflammation taking place. If alpha IL-6 are up, if you're just looking at C-reactive protein to be a marker for that, that could be one. You could actually look at those. You can look at MMP9, TGF-beta1, and then so the bottom line is, as we break down our gut, we're triggering more of this galectin-3. And I want to push that into why it's important to keep it down. Elevated galectin-3 levels were associated with increased hemoglobin A1C, fasting glucose, and C-reactive protein. We'll keep going. It's also a central player in the development progression of atherosclerosis and heart failure. So when GAL3 is high, you actually can measure for GAL3 like endurance athletes to see if they're getting any potential fibrosis in their heart and growth of the left ventricle. It can damage collagen, so now you're getting sore joints, achy joints, more tendency to tear. And galectin-3 is some mouse model, so I'm not all that excited about it. But the bottom line is that we're triggering all of these things, trigger galectin-3 and upregulate. And galectin-3 triggers all of these types of issues. Adhesion and intimal medial thickness, generalized inflammation, cell proliferation, doubling of galectin-3 at the course of 6 months, irrespective of baseline, increase a high risk in a patient where additional care and management and efforts for advanced therapies are warranted. This was cardiovascular research. This is back in 2011, guys, but we're not tying galectin-3 to the gut. But galectin-3 gets upregulated via lipopolysaccharide, most significantly, which is coming from the gut. A gut that's broken down, a gut with poor circulation, a gut that's triggering a lot of inflammatory compounds. I gave you the lab ranges. You really don't want them up in the 20s or in the high 20s. Ideally, you want to be down around 17 or less. In COVID, increased GAL3 reported with severe and non-severe outcomes. So the higher the GAL3, the more the severe the outcome. It also correlated with higher CRP, higher D-dimer, neutrophil counts. So actual independent predictor. And what activation of the microglial, what does that lead to? All of these neurodegenerative diseases. So am I saying food allergies and sensitivities cause these conditions? No. What I'm saying is food allergies and sensitivity will cause a change in the integrity of the gut, leading to increased lipopolysaccharide, crosses the blood-brain barrier, also gets into all your tissues and triggers inflammation. It triggers COX. It actually triggers NF-kappa B, which then oxides and COX-1, COX-2, all that stuff gets unleashed, as well as a bunch of other cytokines. So my point is that we think of when we really need to test for food allergies. I think it's so important that everybody get tested for their food allergies, even if they don't have symptoms yet, because diabetes is a silent killer. A lot of times people don't have those types of issues. So this is just more on galectin-3. I think we can get past that. If you look at this, neuroimaging on 513 participants here, 27% more prevalence of Alzheimer's that they had both amyloid and tau pathologies. We used to think amyloid and tau pathologies were the nascent aspect of dementia. Turns out metabolic inflammation, galectin-3 progression are more on the causality side. And this is just more of the same, but it's just emphasizing the fact, get the integrity of the gut down. If you look at all of these different neurologic disorders, all of them associated with galectin-3, and of course, galectin-3 associated with LPS, which is associated with that gut breakdown. Let's take a look. We went through these before, but basically, it's a contributor to everything. Cardiovascular disease, higher IgE food allergies, significant higher risk of cardiovascular disease. Our number one killer. If you look here, 2019, more frequent intolerances to banana, dairy, and eggs. Who knows how many they were testing for, but that's still significant. Another study in 2007 on obese children. If you look at this, IgG antibodies increase. Do they increase? Yes, they did. It elevated their CRP and their interval media thickness, creating early heart disease. And we got kids on a lot of antibiotics, got kids on PPIs, you got kids taking medications that could create a problem. And then, of course, in type 2 diabetes, the thing I want to just bring about is inflammation causes insulin resistance, leads to diabetes. So if you're creating significant inflammatory signaling in the gut because of unknown food allergens, and now I'm gaining weight, I'm insulin resistant, oh, I need a GLP-1, nothing's working. If you haven't looked at food and correcting the gut, yeah, that might be their only thing that they have. And then, of course, insulin resistance can cause the inflammation. Interestingly, people with metabolic syndrome, the more symptoms they have, the higher their circulating endotoxin. By default, because once you're insulin resistant, you make more adrenaline, more noradrenaline. That's going to reduce blood flow to the periphery, to the gut. You're going to kill off bugs. And that's going to lead to, once again, developing endotoxemia. And just keep in mind, this is happening earlier and earlier. This was the Kaiser study from 2008, basically showing that every point over 84 was a 6% risk of being a diabetic. I tell people by the time you have a 95 blood sugar, you're already probably getting chronic metabolic inflammation because you're at a 60% risk of being a person with diabetes. If you do an insulin with that diabetes and their insulin's above 5, it's even making it more correlative. And then, of course, the new study that just came out on 37,000 lives plus, 9% for every point over 90. And just remember, as glucose goes, so goes the gut. You're gonna feed more unfriendly flora. You're gonna reduce blood flow to the gut. So all of that starts to occur. And so, once again, type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance triggers metaflammation. It's linked to IgG food intolerances. You add things like stress, which is breaking down the gut and is correlated to insulin resistance, right? Higher the cortisol, the more you're insulin resistant. You need to be. If you have chronic high cortisol, you're trying to keep glucose in your bloodstream and you turn off your insulin receptors. Another study here, this was on a food allergy panel showing a positive correlation to food intolerance and insulin resistance. You all realize this now. Gluten's a big problem, but gluten's a big problem with type 1 and type 2 diabetics. It's a big problem on all autoimmune disorders. And there's this, obviously, the gluten-free diet during pregnancy reduces the risk of type 1 diabetes. And then, of course, when you look at the gluten-free diet, and that's why I'm saying don't just go gluten-free. Go low allergen on your type 2 diabetics. You got to cut off as much inflammation as you can because they're going to die earlier than other people. Their kidneys are going to get damaged. Their cardiovascular system is going to get damaged. They get non-alcoholic fatty liver. They get dementia. So it's important to think about cutting off as much inflammation as you can. This is a 2016 study showing, this is Saudi, so the foods are different, but 71 patients with symptoms of allergies and specific IgG allergies that were going on with them. Low diversity in your gut, higher levels of body fat and more inflammation than people with great gut diversity. Where does gut diversity get damaged? When you're having all this reaction from antigen-presenting cells, you're releasing leukotrienes, histamine, you're reacting to peptides that are, now immunologically activated from your food. And of course, with irritable bowel, wheat, gluten, dairy, they're the big offenders, but you have to look at once the person's gut is permeable, they can start reacting to any food, even when it's good for them. So that's important. And then, 2004 study, 3-month elimination diet versus a sham elimination diet. So, 12 weeks, 10% greater reduction in the symptom score than the sham diet. And then basically the conclusion was just IgG could be effective in irritable bowel. I personally think IgG is not enough. And then, of course, with autoimmunity, which can come from a variety of reasons, environmental exposures, increased gut dysbiosis, nutrient deficiencies. This is a 2014 study in the World Journal of Gastroenterology, identifying all of these as being factors, and the gut being in the middle of it. Yeah, you got to detox people. You got to figure out what their exogenous stress load is and what drugs they had a history of taking that might have damaged them in terms of their gut. And then, of course, exposures. And because all of that leads to that decreased mucosal immunity. And common triggers, of course, for autoimmunity, everything from foods to drug-induced microbiome dysbiosis, intestinal permeability. This was Vajani's work, environmental triggers in autoimmunity, and environmental triggers in autoimmunity 2004. I think that's 2014, sorry. And then lipopolysaccharide-induced autoimmunities. When you look at lipopolysaccharide, it upregulates your B cells. You create more polyclonal antibodies. You trigger more nephritis, more autoimmune myocarditis, more autoimmune enterocolitis, more autoimmune arthritis. So it's why it's so important to test foods. Once again, holding autoimmunity, it's about diet, it's about healing the gut, it's about supporting your metabolism and reducing inflammation in your diet with an elimination diet. Test for foods. And this is more of the same. I want to leave time for questions, so I'm only going to go a few more minutes. But once again, if you look at the bottom, this is a 2018 study, observational study on autoimmunity reviews. IgG levels significantly increased in autoimmune patients. So yes, IgG does matter. So you do want to test it. And if they're hot, meaning in the red or yellow, and they have an autoimmune disorder, they probably need to get off those foods. And at least get off those foods for 90 days before you retest. And you're working their gut the whole time. And you're not only working their gut, if they're stressed out and anxious, you need to work on their stress. I always work the gut-brain connection, because if they're stressed out and not sleeping, they're just upregulating those enterochromaffin cells, and the enteric nervous system is going to be firing, creating more inflammatory response. So I always try to work at those together, because otherwise you can be spinning your wheels on your food allergens. Many of you probably have experienced that, where they eat new foods and now they're sensitive to new foods, and they're still sensitive to some of the old foods. But you want to think about, what do I need to do to really limit that expression? Obviously, peptides like lorazepam or KPV, which is a 3 amino acid chain that downregulates TNF alpha. Body protection compound, which you can get as a dietary supplement, actually works really well to help repair the mucosal barrier. And this is a great slide by Rupa, right? Right here, underlying connection between food sensitivity and autoimmunity. The gut, you get this antigen migration, you get the B cell activation, and you start to attack your organs. Just another study showing IgG matters. And I've already talked about the gut and bacterial translocation. I'm just trying to give you as much as I can. If you look at the endocrine system, the immune system, and this inflammation response, this is what we have to be thinking about, that the microbiota actually can influence the endocrine system. I actually want to get, if you look here, microbiome disruption connected to food allergies and sensitivities and linked to autoimmunity. 75% of people with new onset RA have microbiome problems. I do want to get to this one area. I know you guys are going to get these slides, but I want to get to this, because it even affects your sex hormones. When lipopolysaccharide is high, not a lot of human data, a lot of animal data, but the data is coming out now. Through obesity, poor diet, increased high-fat diets, you increase your permeability, increase your endotoxin. What starts to happen? Increased gut permeability creates lipopolysaccharide into circulation. It decreases testicular production of T, because it it inhibits the Leydig cells steroidogenesis effect. So it decreases both luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. So why do we have people needing to get TRT? I get it. When your hormones are low, you're going to feel bad, men or women. But do they have gut problems? Do they have food allergies? Are they bloated? Are they gassy? Do they have rashes? They have cognitive challenges? Are they achy? All those things could be contributing to it. And also, you're going to get less effectiveness. And the gelding theory actually this is more about the endotoxin getting through, creating metabolic endotoxemia, diminishing luteinizing hormone drive for testosterone production centrally, as well as in the Leydig cells. Bottom line, if you're looking at the HPA axis, make sure you're looking at their gut. And strategies, it's obviously do food testing, look at elimination diets, test for use from infant food, allergy testing, so that you can better look at repatterning of the immune system. We can have a whole talk on just the supplements that are for the immune system to correct it. But I'm going to stop there. If I'm going to stop my share so that we can put up that last slide, I believe, Lexi, if you can do that, for the benefit of the infinite food allergy folks, that would be amazing.
Welcome to Rupa Health, the best place to order, manage, and track results from over 30 different lab companies in one single place for free. It's going to take you under 2 minutes to sign up, and you can order any functional medicine lab for your client in under 30 seconds. Let me show you how it's done. So here's our beautiful interface. I'm typing in the name of my client, selecting the lab that I want to order for them, and hitting send. From there, Rupa and their amazing team handle the rest. They email the client, collect payment, and even offer an interest-free 3-month payment plan. We've also built the world's largest library of information about chronic health conditions, the lab tests that can help you find the root cause, and the evidence-based interventions that you can use to help people heal from them. It's called the Rupa Health Magazine. There, we have in-depth articles about almost any health condition you can imagine. And we give you step-by-step protocols that other clinicians have used to help their clients heal and that are verified by evidence-based sources. You should totally check it out, and it'll transform your practice. And we can't wait to see you. So make sure you sign up today at rupahealth.com.